She had been on her feet for 14 hours. Not the kind of 14 hours that passes in a blur of meetings and coffee breaks and small talk by the printer. The kind that leaves a person hollowed out. The kind where your shoes feel like they're made of stone, and the fluorescent lights above you have been burning so long into your eyes that even when you close them, you still see white. The kind of shift where you watch a man take his last breath at 3:47 in the morning. And then 12 minutes later, you have to walk into another room and smile gently at a frightened elderly woman and tell her everything is going to be all right. Because that is what the job asks of you, and you give it, because that is who you are. Her name was Camille Reyes, 34 years old, registered nurse at St. Augustine Medical Center Trauma Unit, 8 years in that building. 8 years of watching people arrive in pieces and fighting, with everything she had, to put them back together. She lived alone in a small 2-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from the hospital, in a part of the city that wasn't dangerous but wasn't exactly warm either. The kind of neighborhood where people kept their eyes forward and their conversations short. She had a houseplant she sometimes forgot to water, a collection of paperback novels stacked on the floor beside her bed because she never got around to buying a bookshelf, and a half-finished mug of tea that always seemed to go cold before she got back to it. She had no family close by. Her mother was in Puerto Rico. Her brother lived in Atlanta with a wife and 2 kids and a life that had slowly drifted out of sync with hers. She had friends at the hospital, good ones, but the hours they all kept made real friendship feel like something they were always scheduling for later. She didn't mind it most days. She had made a quiet peace with the solitude. She found meaning in the work. She found purpose in the small victories, a patient who walked out under their own power. A family that hugged her in the hallway with tears running down their faces. Those moments were enough. But tonight, driving home in the dark at 1:30 in the morning, with the radio turned low and the heater running and the city sliding past her windows in slow amber light, she felt the particular exhaustion that goes deeper than the body. The kind that settles into your chest. She had lost someone tonight. A young man, 26 years old, brought in after a car accident. She had worked on him for 40 minutes. She had done everything right, and it hadn't mattered. She gripped the steering wheel and breathed slowly through her nose. She passed a gas station, a laundromat still lit up, empty. A bus stop where a woman sat alone with a large bag in her lap, looking at nothing. And then the lights came on behind her, red and blue, strobing, filling her rearview mirror like something electric and sudden. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not guilt. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had been driving the speed limit, both hands on the wheel, everything in order. But the tightening came anyway, the way it comes for people who have learned through experience that being in the right doesn't always mean anything when the lights flash behind you. She pulled over without hesitation. Right hand turned the hazards on, left hand kept the wheel visible. She pulled her ID lanyard from around her neck and set it on the dashboard, still in its hospital badge holder. She breathed. The patrol car sat behind her for almost 3 minutes before anyone got out. She watched the light in her mirrors. She kept her hands on the wheel. She waited. There were 2 of them. The first officer approached her driver's side window. He was tall, heavy-shouldered, with a flashlight that he pointed directly into her face before she had a chance to say anything. The light was aggressive, the kind meant to disorient. She squinted. License and registration. No greeting, no explanation, no reason offered for the stop. She spoke calmly, measured. Of course. Can I ask what this is regarding? License. And registration. She reached slowly toward the glove compartment, narrating every movement the way she'd been taught. The way every black woman in this country learns to narrate their movements when the red and blue lights appear. She handed over the documents. He took them without looking at her. The second officer had come around to the passenger side. He was younger, buzz-cut, leaning slightly against the door with his arms folded in a way that felt less like vigilance and more like performance. He was looking into her backseat, moving his flashlight slowly across the interior as if searching for something he already believed was there. "You coming from a party?" the first officer asked. She blinked. "No, I'm coming from work." "Where do you work?" "St. Augustine Medical Center. I'm a nurse, trauma unit." He didn't look up from her license. There was a pause that lasted too long. The kind of pause designed to make a person feel small. "You been drinking tonight?" "No." "You sure about that?" "I am absolutely sure about that," she said. And for the first time there was the faintest edge in her voice. Not anger, not aggression. Just the particular firmness of a woman who has worked 14 hours, lost a patient, and is now being asked if she's been drinking while sitting completely still in a perfectly straight lane, with no moving violations on record. The first officer stepped back from the window and said something to his partner she couldn't hear. The second officer straightened up from the passenger side. Then the first one came back. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." She felt the words land in her stomach. "Why? Step out of the vehicle. I would like to know why you're asking me to exit my vehicle." "I haven't been given a reason for this stop." His voice dropped half a register. Something shifted in his posture. The professional distance collapsed into something more personal. "Step out." Now, she opened the door slowly. She stood on the asphalt in the cold air, still in her scrubs, her hospital ID badge still hanging from the lanyard she had looped around her hand. The wind off the street was sharp and smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. The fluorescent wash of the street lamps made everything look pale and overexposed. What happened next took less than 8 seconds. The first officer moved toward her with an instruction she hadn't been given time to comply with. When she turned to ask him to repeat it, his hand came down on her shoulder with a force that was not about compliance. It was about something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with the law and everything to do with a long, ugly history of moments exactly like this one. His grip tightened. He began to pull her toward the hood of the car. And Camille Reyes did something that would change the trajectory of everyone's night. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She planted her feet. She had been trained years ago in self-defense. Not because she had anticipated this exact moment, but because a woman living alone in a city, working late shifts, walking to a parking garage at 2 in the morning more times than she could count. A woman like that prepares herself. She had taken a course through the hospital, then another one privately. She knew her rights the way she knew her medical protocols, precisely, thoroughly, without room for ambiguity. She looked directly at the first officer and said, in a voice that was completely controlled, "I am not resisting. I am informing you that this contact is not lawful. You have not stated a legal basis for this stop or for this removal from my vehicle." He tightened his grip. "I am a registered nurse. My name is on that badge on your cruiser's dashboard camera right now. I want you to hear this clearly. I know exactly what you are doing, and I need you to understand that I know." There was a silence on that street that felt enormous. The second officer had gone completely still. The first officer's grip loosened, just slightly, just enough to betray the fact that something she said had reached him. She didn't pull away, she didn't escalate. She simply stood there immovable, her badge held up in the light. "Call your supervisor," she said, "right now. I'm asking you to call your supervisor and I want their name on record." More silence. The radio on the first officer's shoulder crackled. He didn't reach for it. "I will not be moved to that hood," she said. "And I will not give you anything that looks like aggression so you can use it. I know how this works. I have watched how this works from emergency rooms. I have treated the people who come in after moments like this one. So I am asking you, clearly and calmly, to tell me the reason for this stop, and to do your job within the boundaries of the law." The second officer took a small step back. She noticed it. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the first one. The first officer's jaw was tight. His flashlight was still up, still pointed at her chest, but something behind his eyes had shifted. He was recalculating. She could see it. The certainty he had arrived with was no longer completely solid. He lowered the flashlight by a few inches. There was a report of a vehicle matching this description, driving erratically about 6 blocks back. "Then you have the wrong car," she said. "I have been driving at or below the speed limit for the past 20 minutes. My dashcam will confirm that." He hadn't known about the dashcam. She watched it register. "I also have my hospital's security exit log, which will confirm what time I clocked out tonight. I have a GPS route on my phone. And I have footage from this stop, which began recording the moment your lights appeared in my mirror." She had a small recording device clipped to her sun visor. She had installed it 6 months ago, after the third time a friend had told her a story that made her stomach drop. It was small, discreet, recording. The air between them changed, not dramatically. Not with any sudden collapse of ego or cinematic surrender. It changed the way the temperature changes before a storm, slowly, perceptibly, with a kind of inevitability. The second officer finally spoke. His voice was quieter than she expected. "We should call it in," he said, to the first officer, not to her. A long pause stretched out across the dark street. Then the first officer took a step back from her, not all the way, but enough. She stayed exactly where she was. She did not move closer. She did not say anything more. She had made her case in a language that left no interpretive room. She had done it without losing herself. Without rage, though the rage was there, deep and justifiable and real. She had simply held it in her hands and used it as fuel for clarity instead of fire. Because she knew, with brutal and intimate knowledge, that fire would have ended this differently. They stood in the cold for another few minutes. A supervisor was eventually called. A sergeant whose voice over the radio sounded measured and careful, who asked the officers to describe the situation, and whose questions became increasingly pointed as the picture clarified. She stood on the sidewalk and waited. She didn't call anyone, she didn't cry. She looked at the street and let herself feel what she was feeling, fully and quietly, the way you feel things when there is no one around to perform composure for. The supervisor arrived 17 minutes later. He was a man in his 50s, thick through the chest, gray at the temples. He walked the scene with the practiced calm of someone who had been managing difficult situations for decades. He spoke to his officers first, out of earshot. Then he walked toward her. She watched him approach. He stopped a respectful distance away, looked at her badge, then looked at her. "Ms. Reyes, yes, I've been told what happened here tonight." He paused. Not the pause of a man building a wall, the pause of one measuring his words honestly. "I want to offer you an apology on behalf of this department. What you experienced during this stop was not appropriate." She let that sit for a moment. "I need more than an apology," she said. Her voice was still steady. "I need a formal incident report filed tonight, with my account included in full. I need the footage from both your officers' body cameras preserved. And I need the name and badge numbers of both officers documented in writing before I leave this street." The sergeant nodded, slowly, with something that looked to her like a kind of recognition. Not of her specifically, but of what she represented, a person who had not been broken by the machinery of this moment. A person who had stood in the exact place where the machinery expects people to crumble and had not crumbled. "All of that will be done," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, searching for the performance in it, finding, to her carefully measured surprise, that she didn't entirely. The documentation took 40 minutes. She stood outside in the cold in her scrubs, her hospital ID still in her hand. and gave her account with the same precision she brought to documenting a patient's care. Every detail, every word, every timestamp. She had been trained to be exact. She used that training now. When it was over and the patrol car had finally pulled away, and the sergeant had given her his direct line and left, she sat back in her car and did not move for a long time. The heater ran. The radio was still low. The city outside her windows was quieter now, the deep quiet of a city at 3 in the morning, when even the restless ones have mostly gone still. She pressed both palms flat against her thighs. She thought about the young man she had lost tonight, 26 years old. She thought about the fact that tonight she had stood in the dark on a wet street in her hospital scrubs and fought for herself with the same focused deliberateness that she fought for her patients. She thought about every person who hadn't been able to do that. Every person who hadn't known their rights, or had known them but had no recording device, or had no witness, or had panicked, or had trusted, or had simply not come home. She thought about all of them with a deep, aching fullness that was not quite grief, and not quite rage, but something that lived in the space between, that had no clean name. She thought about her mother in Puerto Rico, who called her every Sunday and always ended the call with the same words. "Be careful, Mija, be careful." She had always told her not to worry. She stared at the rain beginning to fall against her windshield. Light drops at first, then heavier. She had fought back tonight, not with her hands, not with volume, not with anything the world could use against her. She had fought back with knowledge, with preparation, with an absolute refusal to become small in a moment designed to make her feel exactly that. She had fought back the way she had always fought, in every room she had ever walked into where someone looked at her and quietly decided she wasn't quite what they expected, wasn't quite what they thought was meant to be there. She had always fought back, quietly, precisely, without apology. She started the car. She pulled out into the empty street. The rain fell steadily now, the kind of rain that fills the silence and makes the world seem very close and very small. She would file the formal complaint in the morning. She would contact the nurses' union. She had a friend, another nurse who had a brother who was an attorney. She would make that call, not out of bitterness, not out of a desire to burn anything down, but because the documentation mattered, because the record mattered, because every moment of accountability that got written into the official history of things made the next person's version of this night even slightly more survivable. She turned onto her street, parked in front of her building, sat for one more moment. The rain on the roof of the car was a low, constant sound, like the hospital at night, like the rhythm of a monitor, steady, present, still running. She reached up and unclipped the recording device from her sun's visor, held it in her palm. This small, understated, ordinary thing. She had installed it on a quiet Saturday afternoon, without drama, without telling anyone, simply because the world had asked her to be prepared, and she had listened. She had listened. She got out of the car and walked through the rain to her front door. She was soaked by the time she got inside, but she barely noticed. She took off her shoes in the entryway, set her bag down, walked to the kitchen and filled the kettle. She stood at the counter and waited for the water to boil. There is a kind of dignity that cannot be given to a person. It cannot be issued by a badge or a title or an apology offered on a dark street by a tired sergeant trying to find the right words. It cannot be taken away either, though the world spends enormous energy trying. It is built slowly, across years of choosing yourself in the moments when choosing yourself costs something. It is reinforced by preparation, by knowledge, by the private, unglamorous work of becoming someone who knows what they are worth and refuses to negotiate on that point, even at 3 in the morning, even in the rain, even when every molecule of your body is already depleted, and the easiest thing would be to just comply and go home and tell yourself it wasn't that bad. Camille Reyes had never been good at telling herself things weren't that bad when they were. The kettle clicked. She poured the tea. She carried it to the window and looked out at the street below, rain silver and quiet, the street lamps throwing soft orange circles on the wet pavement. A city at rest. A city that would wake up tomorrow and move through itself without knowing what had happened on that corner, what had been demanded and defended and documented in the dark. But she knew. And the recording device, sitting on her counter, knew. And somewhere in the official files of a police department that would spend the next several days reviewing body camera footage and answering questions they did not want to answer. The truth of it would be there too. Patient, unambiguous, waiting, she sipped her tea. For the first time in a very long time, it was still warm.